Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. Day 4 of spoiler season continues on. Not sure why I did that. I've done a lot of episodes today, so I'm bound to get goofy toward the end. Regardless, if you haven't seen an episode on Tivit, I'm just going to keep going with that. Tivit, Seller of Secrets, make sure you check that episode out because I did not think that this kind of a commander could ever exist, and it is a very exciting one. And also make sure you check out my episode on Burglar's Halo Stash. Yeah, that's a card name, and that is an incredibly good card. Probably going to be the most expensive card from this set, at least that's my guess. So if you want to see what this absolutely crazy card does, make sure you check that episode out at some point, and also check out my most recent episode on a very janky but very lovable commander with Crow's Defense Contractor. And yeah, this is the kind of commander that I can definitely see myself building around for a very janky build. And speaking of janky, well, you might be able to call some parts of this idea janky, maybe the whole thing janky, but whether it's janky or not, I am definitely going to break Henzie Toolbox Torre. This just is the kind of commander that's just asking to be broken. So with all that said, blame Eddie in the comments below because, yeah, Eddie breaks things. Yes. So, Henzie Toolbox Torre is definitely an interesting name, and this is a very interesting commander, a 3/3 double rogue for black, red, green, so yeah, Jund, essentially. And it says, each creature spell you cast with mana value 4 or greater has Blitz. The Blitz cost is equal to its mana cost. Now, what exactly is Blitz? That is a brand new mechanic from this set, and basically it means that you can choose to cast that spell for its Blitz cost. If you do, it gains haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. And on top of that, Blitz cost you pay costs 1 less for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game. So this commander does some really interesting things, and yes, there are definitely some ways that you can build this in a non-broken way, but I really feel like, well, taking this commander to the max and just trying my best to make this as ridiculous as possible. So the goal for this deck is for us to, well, lose our commander a couple of times. Literally, we just want to have to recast our commander, let's just say, 3 times, okay? Now, there are ways to have to cast this commander less, and we'll talk about those, but what we really want to do is get our commander out, probably sacrifice it for some value, and then recast it. And just keep doing that until we've done so. Again, probably 4 times is what we're shooting for. Because again, every single one of our creature spells with mana value 4 or greater has Blitz. And those Blitz costs are going to cost 1 less for every single time we cast our commander. So if we say, oh, I don't know, have a massive amount of 4 mana, let's just say generic mana creatures, like some artifact creatures in this deck, we could then just maybe cast those creatures for free. And then, of course, because those creatures were blitzed, well, they have haste, and when they just happen to, die, we get to draw a card. Now, that might happen at the end step, or maybe we've got another way to get rid of those creatures ahead of time. And then maybe we've got some ways to keep this thing going. But before we jump into these cards and the plans built around them, well, in the description below, I have a link to the list of cards that I'm mentioning in this episode because, well, when new commanders are spoiled, people get excited about the commanders, and sometimes certain cards go up in price quite quickly. So if you want to pick up these cards sooner rather than later, well, go check out that link. But now with that said, let's jump into the cards. First up, I just want to talk about a card like Rootless Knave, which doesn't really see all that much play in Commander, but for this Commander and this kind of a strategy, this can be an incredible card. It's a 3/2 Orc Pirate that has pay 2 and a black, sacrifice a creature, create 2 treasure tokens. And if we really want to, we can sacrifice 3 treasures to draw a card, but yeah, the actual sacrifice outlet for sacrificing creatures and turning them into treasures is what I want to focus on here. Again, my goal with this deck is just to keep getting my commander out and sacrificing it over and over again, or, getting it to die in another way. But yeah, if I can actually generate value by losing my commander, that's great. Especially if I can, ramp or, make temporary mana in a way with something like this, where then I can use that mana to recast my commander, because again, I am trying to get to, for the most part, again, we'll talk about the different scenarios, 4 total casts for our commander. So again, we get that blitz reduction of 4. And then actually Ruthless Knave can act as a good sacrifice outlet as well for our other creatures, and we'll talk about those, well, probably now. Regardless, we need to have a lot of ways to generate a lot of mana to be able to get our commander out so many times into sacrifice, and yeah, there are plenty of fantastic ways, including, on creatures that can actually help us out with this entire strategy, like a Solemn Simulacrum. Solemn Simulacrum does, of course, cost 4, which is the magic number for this deck, and on top of that, when it enters the battlefield, we search our library, basic land card, put it into play, tapped, and shuffle our library, and when it dies, we draw a card. So, again, if we can blitz this into play, and again, we really want to blitz into play for free at a certain point with our commander, we get to ramp and also draw 2 cards again when it dies, because again, that blitz. Next up, how about Mindless Automaton, a 0/0 that comes into play with 2 counters on it, and by paying 1, we can discard a card to get a counter on it, or we can remove 2 counters from it to draw a card. So, obviously, we can utilize this to kind of cycle through cards in our deck by, discarding cards that we don't need right now, or actually like in our graveyard for, other cards, essentially, eventually, because we're going to move counters from it. Or, just the second that this comes into play, we can just take those 2 counters off of it to draw a card, and then again, if we blitzed it, draw a second card. Moving on, though, a card that can get absurd once we're set up, though, is Biblioplex Assistant, a 2/1 flying gargoyle that has, when it enters the battlefield, put up to 1 target insert sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library. So we can go get a massive insert sorcery that can really help out our strategy back with this, and again, if we've got a way to, say, sacrifice this and we blitzed it, we get to draw that card immediately. Next up, of course, there are plenty of other fantastic artifact creatures, with either ETBs or LTBs that can really help us out, like, Bottle Golems or Treasure Keeper. Bottle Golems has, when it dies, you gain life equal to its power, so yeah, if we've got ways to just keep getting this back again and again and again, which I will demonstrate here in a bit, yeah, we just keep getting more and more life to pad our life total. And then how about Treasure Keeper, which absolutely can help us out, a 3/3 construct that has, when it dies, reveal cards to the top of your library to reveal a non-land card with converted mana cost 3 or less. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost, put all revealed cards not cast away in the bottom of your library in a random order. Now again, the magic number is 4, but we are going to include other cards in this deck, like already mentioned Ruthless Knave, that cost less than that, so we can start getting those out for free with this. And again, if we've got ways to keep getting this back out, that's more free additional value. Next up, and actually now we're finally at the reason that I mentioned that, 4 is the magic number, but sometimes it can be slightly less because of something like Joyous Familiar. Joyous Familiar says, historic spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So again, with that cost reduction, we can take it down to essentially 3 times that we need to get our commander into play in order to get that blitz cost to the exact amount that we need to, again, for our 4 mana creatures. And of course, we can also include other creatures that can kind of, ignore that magic number in some ways because they might have affinity for artifacts or something like that, like Frogmite. So essentially, this one is going to be able to be cast a lot cheaper most of the time. I mean, generally, it's just going to be a free spell for us. And then actually a card that, well, is just a combo engine. Not on its own, it does need something else in play to benefit from the ETB or LTB, but yeah, Ancestral Statue is incredible with this kind of a commander. It says, when it enters the battlefield, return a non-land permanent you control to its owner's hand. So yeah, this can actually just keep bouncing itself. And again, if we can, cast it for free again and again and again, then we can just do that an infinite number of times. And if we've got another card in play that says, hey, when something enters the battlefield, draw a card or do something, we get that as many times as we want. Next up, though, some other key cards in this deck are going to be Sacrifice Outlets, and these are going to be some fantastic ones with Extruder and Rusted Slasher, which again are at our magic number 4. Extruder says sacrifice an artifact, put a +1 counter on target creature, and Rusted Slasher says sacrifice an artifact, regenerate Rusted Slasher. So these can help us get immediate value out of those creatures that we blitzed, because again, yes, we can sacrifice those creatures, at the end step, but we'd rather just draw that card right away. Or should I say the vast majority of the time. Moving on, we actually can utilize some other cost reduction effects with things like Ronus' Monument and Hazoret's Monument as well, but they do work in different ways. Ronus' Monument says green creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and then Hazoret's Monument does the same but for red. On top of that, Ronus' Monument says whenever you cast a creature spell, target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains trample until end of turn, and Hazoret's Monument is similar, but it is whenever you cast a creature spell, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. So again, after casting creature spell after creature spell after creature spell, again with that blitz reduction, we can start pumping creatures a ton with Ronus' Monument, and again, if we're going infinite with something like Ancestral Statue, that is just, hey, infinite power for all of our creatures essentially, and then Hazoret's Monument can help us dig through our deck with that rummaging effect. And obviously, you don't need to be going infinite for these to provide you a lot of value. And again, that cost reduction can actually help with other creatures in this deck that, again, are still kind of, with that, magic number 4, but in different ways. We'll get to them here in a bit. And actually, by here in a bit, I mean now, with things like Brazen Freebooter, Rapacious Dragon, and Stadium Vendors. Brazen Freebooter is a 3/3 that has, when it enters the battlefield, create a treasure token. So this one technically only needs the cost reduction down to 3 again, because this is just going to cost us a red to essentially cast, and again, we basically get that mana back when we make that treasure token. In a similar way, there's Rapacious Dragon, which actually has a converted mana cost of 5, but it can get that cost reduction of 4, and it just costs a red mana at that point, and when it enters the battlefield, we get 2 treasure tokens. So this one can actually net us mana again if we get to that magic number 4. Speaking of which, there's Stadium Vendors, which is a 3/3 goblin for 3 and a red, so 3 is all we need to get to for this one, and when it enters the battlefield, we choose a player, and that player adds 2 mana of any one color they choose. So again, with this one, this can actually net us mana when we end up getting it into play. And of course, there are some other creatures that can really help us out that, aren't artifact creatures, but can still help us a ton in this deck with things like Umori the Collector, Ezroot Channeler, and Garna the Bloodflame. Umori the Collector has, when it enters the battlefield, choose a card type. Spells you cast the chosen type cost 1 less to cast. So yeah, we get this into play, we say creatures, and our magic number all of a sudden is now 3 instead of 4. And actually, in an even bigger way, we can reduce that number even further with Ezroot Channeler, which is incredible in this deck. It is a 4/6 with reach, and it says creature spells you cast cost X less to cast for X the amount of life you gain this turn, and we can tap it to gain 2 life. Again, keep in mind, if we blitz this into play, then it is going to have haste, so we can tap it to gain that 2 life right away. And of course, when we do then, our creature spells that we cast this turn are going to cost 2 less, so again, the magic number is essentially 2 at this point. Now, things can get really crazy when we start talking about Garna the Bloodflame. Garna is a 3/3 with flash, and it has other creatures you control have haste, but the important part is, when it enters the battlefield, return to your hand all creature cards in your graveyard that were put there from anywhere this turn. So again, the goal for this deck is to just cast creature after creature after creature, sacrifice them for value, again to draw some cards, and then, yeah, with Garna, we can essentially just get them all back and do it again. And actually, a really fun piece of tech with Garna that you might not realize is that Garna can actually get itself back with its own trigger if you sacrifice it. So if you've got a free sacrifice outlet in play, just, with that trigger on the stack, sacrifice Garna, and then you're getting Garna back to your hand as well with its own trigger. And of course, if you've got some of those creatures that might actually net you mana when, you're casting them, like that dragon or, the vendors, you potentially could just go infinite with this loop, if you can actually cast Garna for free with that. Regardless, outside of the Blitz draw, we can also benefit from other sources of card advantage with things like Season of Growth, Fecundity, and Moldervine Reclamation. Season of Growth says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, scry 1. Now, scrying isn't card advantage, but it is card selection, and it can really help us out, especially with the number of creatures that we're going to have coming into play. And then Fecundity says whenever a creature dies, that creature's controller may draw a card. Now, this one might help out our opponents, but believe me, we're going to have more creatures dying throughout the game than our opponents will. So essentially, now with our Blitz, that's basically whenever that creature dies, we are drawing 2. And we can get even more value out of something like Moldervine Reclamation, which says whenever a creature you control dies, you gain 1 life and draw a card. So yeah, this one is just for us, so pad your life total and draw a ton of cards. Now, some of my favorite cards that I really have always wanted to build around are cards like Forever Young, Grave Purge, and Foot Bottom Feast, and yeah, this is just the deck for them. Each of these basically do the exact same thing. I mean, Forever Young is a sorcery for 2 mana, Grave Purge and Foot Bottom are 3 mana. Regardless, put any number of target creature cards from your graveyard on top of your library, draw a card. So you get all those creatures into your graveyard again. You're just getting a ton of creatures out. You're sacrificing them for value, and then all of a sudden you're like, all right, let's do that again. Let's get all those creatures back off the top and on top of our library. We'll draw a card. We'll get one of those creatures. We'll put it back into play for free again because of the blitz, and then we'll sacrifice it for value again, drawing a card off the blitz, and then maybe if we've got something like Fecundity in play, drawing a second card. So yeah, we're just going to keep drawing and drawing and drawing into all those creatures that we can cast for free and gaining an absurd amount of card advantage from this. Or should I say card advantage or whatever other value we are getting, from things like Fecundity or Moldavine Reclamation or whatever else we have in play. And yeah, of course, even our sacrifice outlets can provide us value as well. I mean, we talked about Ruthless Knave at the beginning of this episode, but of course there are some fantastic free sacrifice outlets in these colors with things like Viscera Seer and Goblin Bombardment. Viscera Seer says sacrifice a creature, scry 1. So yeah, again, additional card selection is never going to hurt us. And of course, Goblin Bombardment is a fantastic finisher for this kind of attack. It says sacrifice a creature, Goblin Bombardment deals 1 damage to any target. So again, if at a certain point we can just basically loop this, over and over again, we can easily ping down all of our opponents and all of their things, and yeah, just win the game. And of course, there are plenty of other ways to win the game with this kind of a strategy. I mean, okay, Impact Tremors, Marionette Master, just to name a few, obviously are ways that we can finish our opponents off too. But now as this episode is coming to a close, it's time for me to give you my final thoughts on Henzie Toolbox Torre. Yeah, when I see a commander like this one, my mind immediately just starts churning. There have got to be ways, with that cost reduction and with that card advantage that gives you, when you blitz the creature, that you can absolutely just break this commander and just say, you know what, most decks might go in this other direction, but I really want to get to magic number 4, or 3 if we've got cost reducers in play, or 2. You know what I mean. But yeah, that does not mean that you have to build a deck in that direction. Of course, there are plenty of exciting ways that you can build it, and there are plenty of other exciting spoilers and exciting commanders. So yeah, make sure you check out my other quick takes, and make sure you stay tuned for even more quick takes on this channel, because I'm sure there are more exciting spoilers coming up. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again, and have a good one.